government subsidies have yet to really bear fruit. So what do you see as the link, if any, between the need for greater innovation and the need for political liberalization at the same time? Can you have one without the other?
Yeah, actually, this is one of the what seemed to be an irreconcilable paradox to the Western eye, that somehow you have more regulations from the government, and there's a perceived notion of anti-business in China in the last few years. And at the same time, the government is pushing for technology innovation when whilst it is cracking down on its technology companies. This is why we need a much more nuanced view about China. That's why we need to separate the hype from the reality and the macro from the micro. These things can actually coexist. So you've rightly pointed out that some of these traditional technologies in high tech, where China has a latent disadvantage, has taken a long time to catch to the world frontier. But Chinese technologies, especially successful in greenfield technologies, especially like renewables. And it's very important to distinguish, application kind of technologies and high tech and groundbreaking technology. So a point that I made in my book is that China can actually master high tech because that takes, accumulation of skills, the STEM students, the engineers, the huge market, all of which China has. But groundbreaking technology is quite a bit of different thing. And this is where China lacks the US. And I want to argue that it is in part because of the civil society. We in China have 5,000 years of history, but still an important, impatient nation where they've seen quick results and easy wins very fast in the last 40 years. But for basic research, for these long and uncertain cycles of investment, you really need patient capital and patient nation.
So in recent months, prominent lawmakers from both parties on Capitol Hill have advocated a ban on the social media app TikTok, have talked of prohibiting Chinese companies from acquiring U.S. farmland. And the argument in both cases has been, look, there's no such thing as a private Chinese company, that because of the nature of the Chinese Communist Party and the presence of party cells in Chinese companies, at the end of the day, the party calls the shots. And so we in the U.S. need to be on guard against this. Are the lawmakers who worry about this wrong to do so? How do you see the party's ultimate control over these ostensibly private companies?
Well, I don't quite agree with this characterization that private companies are not private. But it's true that when you get into a Chinese system where you have to deal with local governments all the time, what do you call that? The local officials, some of them have a stake in your company, but many of them they don't. But they help the companies coordinate supply chains, attract talent, and then build mini Silicon Valleys all around the country. And they're helping the entrepreneurs. Sometimes they take a stake, sometimes they don't, sometimes they cash out within a year. It's not these kind of long-term subsidies that really characterize the Chinese model today. Now, that said, it is true that state-owned enterprises often have a minority or indirect stakeholder in some of these companies. And if you look at the data, a lot of the capital has links to state-owned enterprises, but state-owned enterprises are also run like modern corporations these days. And so I think you're right, that is a very blurred line. This is the kind of the point that I make in the book. But private companies in the end make their own decisions. Otherwise, they won't be that successful in China. These companies are some of the most successful companies in the world. So that they have these modern organizations. And one really important statistics is 30 years ago, 30% of the wealth belonged to the private firms, private sector. Today, 70% of the wealth belongs to the private sector, which is also providing 80% of the jobs, 70% of national output, and the majority of innovation. So where do you draw the line? But if you look at the US subsidies to companies are enormous. Tesla, SpaceX benefits billions, Amazon, the list goes on and on, GE. So how do we really draw the line?
Right, but not to belabor this, but at the end of the day, doesn't the party call the shots? I mean, if I'm a Chinese executive running TikTok or XYZ Corp, and the party wants me to do something in the interests of the nation or the interests of the party, I can't say no.
Oh, you're probably right. I'm not sure that this is also not true for some companies in the US or other places as well. I'm just not an expert on exactly how this goes, but we're talking about 20 million private companies. There are a few in certain strategic areas, sensitive areas, that I'm sure is the case. But we have to look at the wider scope, and you can't penalize every single private company and accuse it of having the state making the call. I don't think that's really realistically true.